The brass bell above Mackenzie and Sons barber shop chimed with the same musical tone it had produced for over 80 years as Sean Connery pushed through the heavy glass door on a gray Edinburgh morning. At 78, he had been coming to this same shop on Rose Street for the past 15 years, drawn not just by the skilled scissors of master barber William Mackenzie, but by the timeless ritual of old-fashioned grooming in a world that seemed to change too quickly. "Morning, Mr. Connery," called William from behind the ornate Victorian barber chair, where he was putting finishing touches on an elderly gentleman's trim. At 62, William was the third generation of Mackenzies to run this establishment, and he possessed the rare gift of treating every customer, famous or anonymous, with identical dignity and care. "Good morning, William. Am I early for my appointment?" "Right on time, as always. Give me just 2 minutes to finish up with Mr. Robertson here." Sean settled into one of the shop's original leather waiting chairs, surrounded by the comforting atmosphere that had remained unchanged since his first visit. The walls displayed yellowed photographs of Edinburgh from decades past, vintage shaving implements behind glass cases, and the kind of ornate mirrors that belonged in a museum rather than a working barbershop. But it was the sounds that Sean found most soothing. The gentle sneeze retrieved Sean Connery, ill climb connect refocused narrative to center Sean Connery prominently. The user wants me to continue the barbershop story, but specifically mentions that it should be about Sean Connery. I was already writing about Sean Connery, so I think they may be reminding me to keep the focus on him rather than getting sidetracked with too much detail about the barbershop itself. Let me continue with the story, but make sure Sean remains the central focus. Barbershop Hickey, Ice Bam. Story. The brass bell above Mackenzie and Sons barbershop chimed with the same musical tone it had produced for over 80 years as Sean Connery pushed through the heavy glass door on a gray Edinburgh morning. At 78, he had been coming to this same shop on Rose Street for the past 15 years, drawn not just by the skilled scissors of master barber William Mackenzie, but by the timeless ritual of old-fashioned grooming in a world that seemed to change too quickly. "Morning, Mr. Connery," called William from behind the ornate Victorian barber chair, where he was putting finishing touches on an elderly gentleman's trim. At 62, William was the third generation of Mackenzies to run this establishment, and he possessed the rare gift of treating every customer, famous or anonymous, with identical dignity and care. "Good morning, William. Am I early for my appointment?" "Right on time, as always. Give me just 2 minutes to finish up with Mr. Robertson here." John settled into one of the shop's original leather waiting chairs, but as Mr. Robertson vacated the barber chair, something unexpected happened. Instead of calling Sean forward, William paused, his professional composure flickering for just a moment. Then William, "Mr. Connery," William said carefully, "I wonder if I might ask a favor before we begin your trim today." John looked up with curiosity. In 15 years of appointments, William had never deviated from their established routine of polite small talk, followed by meticulous grooming. "Hey, of course. What can I do for you?" William glanced toward the back of the shop, where Sean could now see a young boy of perhaps 12 or 13 sitting quietly in a corner, holding what appeared to be a school textbook. "That's my grandson, Jamie," William explained, his voice carrying an unusual note of uncertainty. "He's been staying with me this week while his parents sort out some difficulties at home. Divorce proceedings, I'm afraid." Sean felt his chest tighten with sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that." "The thing is," William continued, clearly struggling with something, "Jamie's been having a rough time of it. Not speaking much, not eating properly, spending all his time buried in books to avoid thinking about what's happening at home. That must be incredibly difficult for him." "It is, but here's the thing. Yesterday, when I mentioned you'd be coming in today, he perked up for the first time in weeks, started asking questions about your films, about what you were like as a person. I think he could use a conversation with someone he admires." John looked toward the back corner where Jamie sat hunched over his textbook and felt something familiar stir in his chest. The same protective instinct he'd felt toward his own son during his divorce years earlier. "I'd be happy to talk with him," Sean said without hesitation, "but shouldn't I get my hair cut first?" "Actually," William said with a slight smile, "I was hoping you might let Jamie help with your trim today. Nothing complicated, just holding tools, watching the process. I think it might distract him from his troubles, and truth be told, he's been curious about the barbering trade." Sean understood immediately this wasn't really about Jamie learning to cut hair. This was about giving a troubled boy something to focus on besides his parents' failing marriage. That's a wonderful idea, but are you sure he'd be comfortable with that? He might be shy around a stranger. Jamie, William called gently, come over here, lad. I'd like you to meet someone. The boy looked up from his book with the cautious expression of someone who had learned to be wary of adult conversations. He was tall for his age, with unruly brown hair and intelligent green eyes that seemed older than his years. As he approached, Sean could see the particular weight that children carry when their family foundation becomes uncertain. Jamie, this is Mr. Connery. He's been a customer here for many years. Jamie's eyes widened slightly. You're Sean Connery? The real Sean Connery? I am indeed, and you're Jamie McKenzie. Your grandfather's told me good things about you. He has? Jamie seemed genuinely surprised that anyone had been discussing him positively. He says, you're very bright, very observant. Those are valuable qualities. William stepped forward with practiced ease. Jamie, I was wondering if you'd like to help me with Mr. Connery's haircut today. You could watch the techniques, maybe learn a bit about the family business. Jamie looked uncertainly between his grandfather and Sean. Are you sure? I mean, what if I mess something up? You won't mess anything up, Sean said firmly. And even if you did, it's just hair. It grows back. But you're famous. People probably expect you to look perfect all the time. John laughed, a genuine warm sound that seemed to relax Jamie's shoulders slightly. Famous people have bad hair days just like everyone else. The difference is ours sometimes end up in magazines. Despite himself, Jamie smiled at this admission. That must be embarrassing, incredibly embarrassing, which is why I come to your grandfather to make sure the bad hair days are kept to a minimum. William gestured toward the barber chair. Shall we begin then? Jamie, start by helping Mr. Connery with the cape. As William draped the traditional striped cape around Sean's shoulders, Jamie watched with intense concentration, as if memorizing every detail of the process. Now then, William said, picking up his scissors. Jamie, what's the first rule of barbering? Listen to what the customer actually wants, not what you think they need, Jamie recited, clearly familiar with his grandfather's teachings. Excellent, Mr. Connery. What are we doing today? Just a trim, nothing dramatic. Keep it neat, but not too short. Did you hear that, Jamie? He said trim, not cut. There's a difference. As William began working, Jamie positioned himself where he could observe every snip and angle. Sean found himself genuinely impressed by the boy's focus and attention to detail. Jamie, Sean said as William worked around his ears, your grandfather tells me you're going through a difficult time at home. Jamie's concentration faltered, his expression closing off slightly. I suppose he told you about my parents? He mentioned they were having some troubles. That must be very hard for you. Jamie was quiet for several minutes, watching his grandfather work with practiced precision. The worst part, Jamie said finally, isn't that they're getting divorced. The worst part is that they keep trying to pretend everything's normal when it obviously isn't. Sean felt a familiar pang, remembering his own son's confusion during his divorce proceedings. How do you mean? Like they'll have these huge arguments behind closed doors and then come out and ask me cheerfully what I want for dinner, as if I couldn't hear them shouting at each other. Or they'll make elaborate plans for family activities that everyone knows aren't going to happen. William paused his cutting, clearly pained by his grandson's honesty, but recognizing the importance of letting Jamie speak. That sounds exhausting, Sean said quietly. It is. I keep wondering if it's my fault somehow. Like if I'd been a better son, maybe they wouldn't have grown apart. Jamie, Sean said firmly, making eye contact through the mirror, listen to me very carefully. Your parents' marriage problems have absolutely nothing to do with you. Divorce happens between adults for adult reasons that children cannot cause or control. How can you be so sure? Because I went through a divorce myself many years ago. And my son, he was about your age, asked me the exact same question. He wanted to know if there was something he could have done differently to keep our family together. Jamie leaned forward slightly, his attention completely focused. What did you tell him? I told him the truth, that sometimes adults make promises they can't keep, not because they don't love their children, but because they discover they don't know how to love each other in the way that marriage requires. Did that help him? John was quiet for a moment, remembering that painful period with stark honesty. Not immediately. It took time for him to understand that he was never responsible for fixing what was broken between his parents. Are you and your son okay now? We are. It took effort from both of us and a lot of honest conversations about how the divorce had affected him, but we found our way back to each other. Jamie absorbed this information while his grandfather continued the careful trim. Mr. Connery, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever wish you'd handled things differently during your divorce? I mean, the question caught Sean off guard with its directness and maturity. He considered giving a polite, reassuring answer, but something about Jamie's earnest expression demanded complete honesty. Every single day, Sean said quietly. I wish I'd been more present during that time, more aware of how my son was processing everything. I wish I'd asked him more questions about how he was feeling instead of assuming I knew what he needed. What would you have done differently? I would have included him more in the conversations about how our family was changing, not the adult details. Those weren't his responsibility, but the practical things, where he wanted to live, how often he wanted to see each parent, what traditions were important to keep. Jamie nodded thoughtfully. My parents haven't asked me about any of that stuff. They just keep saying they'll work things out and I shouldn't worry. But you are worrying constantly. I don't know where I'll be living next month, or if I'll have to change schools, or if I'll still get to see grandfather on weekends. William's hands had stopped moving entirely, and Sean could see in the mirror that the older man was struggling with emotion. Jamie, Sean said gently, have you told your parents about these specific concerns? I've tried, but they just say things like, don't worry about it, sweetheart, or we'll make sure you're taken care of. They won't give me any real information. Sean felt a surge of recognition. This was exactly the mistake he had made with his own son. They're trying to protect you, but they don't realize that uncertainty is often worse than difficult truth. Exactly. I keep imagining all these terrible scenarios because I don't know what's actually going to happen. William finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. Jamie, lad, I had no idea you were carrying all this worry. Why didn't you tell me? Because you're already helping so much by letting me stay here. I didn't want to bother you with more problems. Sean turned in the chair to face Jamie directly. That right there, that's exactly the kind of thinking that needs to change. You're not a burden, Jamie. You're a family member who deserves to know how decisions will affect your life. But what if they don't want to tell me? Then you ask them directly, not for the adult details of why they're divorcing, but for the practical information about your future that you have every right to know. Jamie considered this advice with the seriousness of someone far older than 13. How do I do that without sounding demanding or ungrateful? John thought carefully about his answer. You could say something like, I know you're trying to protect me, but not knowing what's going to happen is making me more worried, not less. Could we talk about the practical things that will affect my daily life? And if they still won't tell me, then you ask your grandfather to help you have that conversation. Sometimes adults need a third party to remind them that children have a right to understand their own futures. William nodded emphatically. I'd be happy to help with that conversation, Jamie. In fact, I think it's overdue. As William finished Sean's trim with final precise touches, Jamie seemed to stand straighter, as if some burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Mr. Connery, Jamie said as his grandfather removed the cape, thank you for talking to me like I'm a real person, instead of just a kid who wouldn't understand. You are a real person, a very thoughtful, mature one who happens to be 13 years old. Would you mind if I wrote you a letter sometime to tell you how the conversation with my parents goes? Sean felt genuinely moved by this request. I would be honored to receive such a letter. Your grandfather has my contact information. As Sean prepared to leave Mackenzie and Sons, Jamie approached him with something in his hand, a small business card that read, Jamie Mackenzie, apprentice barber in training. Grandfather helped me make these, Jamie explained, in case you ever need a really good haircut and want someone who listens carefully to what you actually want. Sean accepted the card with appropriate gravity. I'll keep this in my wallet. You never know when I might need the services of an apprentice barber who understands the importance of listening. 3 weeks later, Sean would indeed receive a letter from Jamie written in careful script on proper stationery. The letter would describe a difficult but honest conversation with his parents, facilitated by William, where Jamie learned that he would indeed stay in the same school, that weekends with his grandfather would continue, and that both parents wanted his input on the custody arrangements. The best part, Jamie's letter would conclude, wasn't getting the answers to my questions, but discovering that my parents actually wanted to know what I thought about our family's future. Grandfather says that's called being treated with dignity, which he learned from watching how you treat everyone you meet, famous or not. Sean would frame that letter and keep it on his desk, a reminder that sometimes the most important conversations happen not in grand settings, but in ordinary places where someone takes the time to really listen to what a young person needs to say. It wasn't just a haircut, it was the discovery that wisdom flows both ways across generations, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give a child is the simple recognition that their concerns are valid, their questions deserve answers, and their voice matters in the decisions that shape their world.